I guess it was about 60 years ago. I was a little guy spending the summers in Wildwood, New Jersey with my grandmother. And we'd play her favorite game with her friends or my grandfather, sometimes my father if he was there, pinochle. And one of the things she would try to drum into my head was that you had to play the hand you dealt, and that what you had to avoid was overplaying your hand. When you overplayed your hand, she would warn me over and over again, you lose. Play the hand you're dealt. That's how simple it was. You overplay it, you lose. Now, what does this have to do with the killing of an innocent man in Minneapolis, Minnesota? And my answer is everything. In my opinion, the killing of George Floyd was the clearest example we've had, at least in recent memory, of cops killing an innocent man, subdued, cuffed, lying in the street, being polite. He didn't just say, stop, I can't breathe. He said, stop, I can't breathe, comma, officer. I don't think I'd be that polite if somebody was cutting off the blood flow to my brain and I was approaching death. But that's what Mr. Lloyd did, and the cop, seemingly nonchalantly, just kept rolling his knee on the guy's neck until he expired. Atrocious conduct. So armed, thus armed, the people in Minneapolis and elsewhere in the country who are seeking reform, who are seeking change, found themselves dealt an extremely powerful hand. They had the cards. They had hand, as they used to say in Seinfeld. They had it. All they had to do was to make sure that they didn't overplay it. Unfortunately, that's what's happened. It's been overplayed. When Mr. Lloyd died, no matter what channel I was watching, no matter what I was reading, nobody was offering the usual mitigating circumstances. Nobody that I could find seemed to be defending the policeman. He didn't deserve to be defended. And hell, I just heard that even his wife's divorcing him. She's not even sticking by him. I think that says a lot. The mayor of Minneapolis fired all 4 cops. He had the authority to do that. He doesn't have the authority to pronounce the offending police officer guilty, or even arrest him for that matter. That lied with the DA, the prosecutors at the county office. President Trump took this seriously and very quickly ordered the DOJ to investigate, to launch an investigation, bring in the FBI. Nobody was defending the policeman. Nobody was offering, like I said, mitigating circumstances. Those who wanted to use this to seek reform and to seek change simply had to avoid overplaying their hand. Keep the focus on Mr. Lloyd. Protests, to be sure. Protests in multiple cities. Fine. That's an American right. It's more than a right. It's an American tradition going back to the period before the Revolution. But don't overplay the hand. Unfortunately, what we've been watching is just that. The overplaying of a hand. The death of George Floyd, the need for reform, the need for change, has been appreciably overshadowed by rioting, by looting, and by arson. Not just in Minneapolis, but in many cities across the country. And we'll see what happens this evening, but it appears to be spreading. Even the most sympathetic news outlets, CNN, MSNBC, both of which I watched for a while last night, while they continue to argue and to label what's going on, even looting and arson, as protests, can't hide the fact that in the films that they're showing, these aren't protests. These have gone beyond protests. I mean, even CNN's headquarters in Atlanta was attacked. If you watch these outlets, you can see that they've gone over to the defensive. While they keep talking about what happened to George Floyd, they spend as much or more time trying to characterize what's happening as protest when it's not. The focus on Mr. Lloyd has been lost. His supporters, those people who wanted to use what happened to him for positive developments, have been thrown on the defensive. The hand's been overplayed. And as my grandmother warned me over a half century ago, when you play the hand you're dealt, if you overplay your hand, you'll end up losing. In many ways, what we're watching are some things that have been happening in this country that led me to entitle this YouTube channel, The Abyss Beckons. I started warning about that in a book I wrote, published over 10 years ago. That's how it ended, The Abyss Beckons. I was talking about other things as well. But what we can see, if we simply pay attention to what's happening in this country, is that a huge chasm has opened. And month by month, year by year, we're getting closer and closer and closer to that chasm. Unless you're blind, you can lean forward and look into it, and you can see how deep it is. And that's where we're headed. And that's a shame. And it scares me.